just on 10 o'clock, and we'll just have a light chat just to fill in time. We like to get these webinars going almost on time, so we'll just wait until 1 minute past 10, and then we'll get underway. So we always look at subjects to bring to our audience that everyday business owners have to deal with on an everyday basis. And so it was great to connect with Dave Birch today, or for today's webinar. So I'll introduce Dave in a moment. So anyway, good morning, everyone, and thanks for registering for the webinar. And we're going to look at how to improve your cash flow, which of course all starts with doing business with businesses and people who will pay you. So that sounds simple, but I'm sure we have all had to deal with people who don't or can't pay. So Dave Birch, our guest today. Hi, Dave.
Kia ora, Jamie.
Is the Group Managing Director of Smart AR. AR stands for Accounts Receivable. And when you see it written, it looks like Smart AR something else. Now, he's a specialist company or director of a specialist company in guiding business owners on how to first select good payers right through to enforcement when they don't pay. And no, Dave doesn't resort to marginal tactics to get paid. He's got a PDF, which we're going to make available later on in the webinar. It will come up on the screen and you can download it, or we'll also be sending at the end of this webinar an email with the link so you can watch a replay and to be able to download this PDF. The PDF is just chocker with ideas and templates on the whole debtor management process. So before we start, I'd just like to do a shout out for E3 Business Accountants. They financially fund the Brainstorm Cafe, and without their financial support, we probably wouldn't be here today. I'd be doing maybe something a little more meaningful. But anyway, the Brainstorm Cafe was set up to help business owners through COVID. Now we're coming out of it, but anyway, we know that might not be the end of it, and to bring on board experts like Dave, professional people, to talk about key subjects that are the heart of running a successful business. So if you'd like to have a chat to me about what E3 can provide for you after this webinar, send me a text, send me an email, and I'll be happy to chat with you. So I want to now go over to Dave, and what we've got here are the 6 strategies. I'll just bring them quickly up on the screen here. First one is get serious. The second one is reduce the risk. The third one, offer payment options. 4, make early contact. Escalation process, and resource or outsource. Now, Dave will talk to each one of these. So we'll go back to the first one, get serious. I'll be quiet now. Dave, all over to you. Thanks, Dave.
Oh, gee, thanks, Jamie, and I'm super excited to be here. I'm going to try to pack today full of some very practical tips, things that you can actually go back to your business and work on, and that all that stuff is included in the PDF download that's available to everybody else as well. You know, cash flow is just so vitally important to a business operating successfully, and it doesn't really matter what the economic climate is. Cash flow remains important. I was with a business owner the other day, and his business was absolutely booming. It was an IT business. You can imagine how well they've done during the lockdown periods and then beyond as everyone's gone to the cloud. He's grown his business. He's put on new staff. He's got stock in terms of laptops that he can send out to new clients. And yet he was having sleepless nights about his cash flow because he had that combination of a 3-pay month. Every business owner knows what that's like when you've got 3 pays fall in the same month, 3 fortnights due for payment. And he had a couple of his big clients slow paying, so they were disputing or querying some bills, and at the same time he had some large outbound bills in terms of recruitment fees he'd had to pay. So he was having sleepless nights. So good times or bad times, cash flow is important. When we talk about accounts receivable, it's so frustrating because it should be the easiest part of the business cycle. You know, you've done the work, you've delivered the goods, and yet people are slow paying you. How hard is it for people to actually put the money in your account? Not very hard. How frustrating is it that when you are trying to get a hold of someone that hasn't paid you and you hear that they're on holiday, they've gone to Rarotonga, and they're there on your money. How frustrating is that? The clients that you bent over absolutely backwards to get their order out on time, and they were calling you every second day, where's my order, where's my order? And yet when they're overdue owing you money, look, I'm sorry, they're not available, they're not in the office, they'll call you back. How frustrating is that? So accounts receivable is one of those things that everybody pulls their hair out of, and it's really important to get it right. First step is to get serious about your accounts receivable. You've got to know where you are to improve anything. And so you need a baseline for that. And many business owners use their baseline as probably their accounts receivable statement. You can imagine it now, can't you, with the clients listed down on the left-hand side, and then you're in columns of current and 30 and 60 and 90. There is, in fact, a standard metric. It's called debtor days. And we'd suggest if you're serious about making a project to improve your accounts receivable, speak with your accountant, understand how to work out debtor days. Very quickly, it's your debtors, your total amount of debtors divided by your turnover for the year times 365. And that will tell you, on average, how quickly people are paying. So if you've got perhaps terms of trade of 14 days or 20th of the month following, but you work that figure out and it turns out that people are paying you on average, say 50 days or 60 days, that's the gap. All of that in the gap is cash that should and could be in your bank account. So concentrate on getting serious and working out where you are to start. That would be our first recommendation.
So Dave, that gap, sorry, I just interrupt for a moment.
Yep.
That gap is critical because that's the extra cash that's required to run your business. So
Absolutely.
you're going to have really good sales, but then you've got that gap and you've got to fund other people doing business with you, which is back to front, isn't it? So that gap is so critical.
It is, and sometimes it can be daunting because you might work it out as being 50 days or 60 days is what you're being paid, and yet 14 days is your terms of trade. And you think, well, what can I do that's better? A great way to empower yourself is just work out what 1 day is and concentrate on getting it down by one. The real thing with accounts receivables, and many people confuse the two, it's not about people not paying you. Sometimes you talk to folks and you say, how are your debtors? Oh, everyone pays. It's actually the speed that they pay you. It's the velocity of the money coming back into your business, which drives your growth and your ability to pay your own creditors in turn and buy stock and put on marketing functions and in some cases take money out of the business. So yeah, getting it down is a worthy result. Right, should we talk about...
yes, the next one, reduce the risk.
Reducing the risk. Super important. Before you're doing business with people, it's very important to set the terms of trade. And that's, generally speaking, it's a legal document. Hopefully it's been prepared by perhaps your lawyer or your accountant, and it's going to lay out all of the terms upon which you're contracting with your clients. It's important that they're signed before, in fact, you do work with the client. So, incorporate it with your proposal or your quotations. It's great, it's best practice, and we'd recommend this as a tip to document that on your website, maybe on the backs of your invoices, put it in a lot of places so it's highly visible to your clients. And within that, it's also going to cover things like what happens in the event of a default. Can you charge interest in the event of them slow paying you? How do you work out how to approach a dispute about an invoice? Can they just not pay the full amount, or do they have to pay the amount that's not in dispute and you just pick up the dispute process for the challenged amount? So with the terms of trade, there's a whole bunch of tips there that we can share with you. Many folks that are dealing with B2B, so business to business, and the other party might be a company, you can put in a clause that says that if it's signed by a director of the company, the relationship's not only with the company, but it's also with that person personally. And that will prove a great help if something happens to the company itself. The Credit terms are often mentioned in your terms of trade. So how much credit you're giving someone. If it says 20th of the month following, a personal crusade of mine is to remove that. People only typically have 20th of the month following because that's the way it's always been, and it can be ambiguous. Following what? Following when I ring and chase you and you say you didn't get the invoice, so you'll pay me on the 20th of the month following the next invoice that I send you. So you want to remove ambiguity. We'd really suggest that businesses these days with electronic invoicing, you just put in 14 days or 7 days or 30 days, whatever the fixed day number is from the date of the invoice. That would be a great thing to reduce the risk.
With just going to jump in there, Dave, my experience with a lot of our clients is getting the process in place in the terms of trade upfront early, and often business owners who perhaps are not experienced are a little bit timid. They want to get the business and worry about getting paid later, and they will go out of their way to engage with a client or provide products or services, but then they hesitate to say, no, I want you paid. I want to be paid within 10 days or 20 days because I think that might ruin the sale.
Yes, and no one, I don't believe, has ever lost a sale because of specifically their terms of trade. If it is a negotiating point, then definitely negotiate around it. But I've not really seen many, if any, folks that are selling perhaps marketing services or IT services, the buyer using the terms of trade as one of the most mission critical criteria for choosing a provider. So yeah, get it sorted up front. Just one last thing on the reducing the risk, if I may, Jamie, is the credit check your clients. If you're offering credit, I wouldn't offer you $1,000 free out of my pocket, but if I've provided you services worth $1,000, that's effectively what we're doing. So make sure that you credit check your clients. It doesn't cost a lot of money, maybe $30 to $50. And there's a cool thing available with the credit agencies now that you can monitor the ongoing credit assessment of a client. And that means that for maybe $6 or $7, if they default on somebody else, you hear about it, because the client that's a great client this year might not be such a great client 2 years from now. So both credit check and that ongoing assessment is important. Yeah, let's talk about multiple payment offerings. A very big man, an accountant, when I was first working with accountants, he sat intimidatingly behind his desk when I said, what options do you offer clients to pay? And he said, we offer them both. And I wasn't quite sure what he meant by both, whether it was, check and credit card or direct credit and credit card. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they can pay with their kneecaps intact or not. And then he had a good old laugh about it because he knew how hard it was to actually get paid. Multiple credit options or payment options is super important. And what we mean by that is folks that might be able to pay you by a direct credit to the account. Checks are now gone, but maybe you can collect from them by direct debit. Offering credit card, incorporating technology so you don't actually have to offer credit terms at all. I had a plumber visit to do some work at my place recently and brought the mobile payment machine, whereas previously exactly the same plumber had always sent me a bill, but this time I was on site and I paid by credit card at the moment. The more payment options that you offer, the easier it is to get paid by one of them that suits the client. And don't forget to incorporate technology in that. Put your payment options on your website. So if a client's got the invoice these days with electronic invoices, you should be able to click through to the website, see the payment options that are available, pick the one that suits you and pay there and then. So making it seamless and frictionless in terms of a transaction is important.
So Dave, what's your view on incentivizing an early payment or a 7-day payment or even a payment before the product or service has been delivered? if it's been incentivized. Have you seen any success with that type of prompt?
Yeah, absolutely. And it often depends upon the economic climate at the time, Jamie. There's a lot of businesses, not all business, but there's a lot of business at the moment that have got quite a lot of cash. So if you're offering them a discount for payment in advance or early payment, a good number of them will pick up and run with that. One of the things you've got to be a bit careful about is folks taking advantage of that after your due date. So that courage that you were talking about before to talk about terms of trade, you've got to apply the same courage to make sure that folks aren't taking advantage of early payment discounts at the 90-day overdue point.
Now, I've noticed quite a few questions coming in, which is good, but we'll get through this webinar first. If we've got time, we can answer those questions live at the end of the webinar. But as your question is lodged, we will endeavour to answer you by email after the webinar, later today or maybe tomorrow at the latest. So just be patient to get through to the end of the webinar. If we run out of time, your question will still get answered. Now, this one, make early contact. Tell us about that, Dave. What is early contact? Well, when should early contact take place?
I think in a lot of instances, early contact for a debtor is when they've gone 2 or 3 days overdue. And if the amount that you're owed is something north of, probably, it would differ for every business, but if it's north of maybe $500, it pays to telephone the debtors. And if you're going to make a phone call, do it at 2 or 3 days past when it's due. And remember that first phone call, it's not debt collection. It's not that these folks aren't going to pay you. Treat it very much as a customer service call. And I'll give you what we call a power phrase to include in that call. But remember, when you're making them, that you're in charge. You've provided the service, you've agreed your terms of trade, the customer is actually legally obligated to pay you now, but you're making a courtesy call to make sure that they've got the invoice. That might go something like, Kia ora, it's Dave here calling from ABC Plumbers. Look, just a courtesy call. You're probably aware that we did that work for you 2 weeks ago, and that invoice has just slipped out overdue. These are the ways that we can tidy that up today. You can direct credit the money into my account, and you can run through with the client what your payment options are. And if you've got multiple, that gives them a choice. And then one of the power phrases is, how would you like to tidy that up today? And then you zip it, right? Say nothing. The power of the pause.
I've also seen a technique that works, and that's a preemptive strike. No, I won't use the word strike. A preemptive call maybe 3 or 5 days before an account is due, and you receive a call saying, hi, Jamie, the work that we did last couple of weeks ago is due for payment next Monday. How's your cash flow at the moment? Is there any impediment for you to be paying that on time on Monday? Because I've got all my staff to pay. Let me know if that's going to be okay at your end.
Yeah.
And then again, zip it and you wait.
Yeah, and what that's relying on in terms of a strategy is that across New Zealand and Australia, which I think all of the audience for this webinar are, most of the time we keep our promises. So if we promise to pay on time, we typically try to. So if you make the call ahead of time, then that's going to increase the chances. Telephoning folks isn't cheap though. So typically calls in advance of due date are generally reserved for higher invoice amounts, and checking in with the customer's cash flow, I think again, is just showing that you're doing it as a customer service rather than as a debt collection strategy. Another, I suppose, tip or a power phrase that we'd recommend folks maybe take a note of this is you'll get all sorts of pushback on the phone calls. You get a promise to pay. You'll get folks saying, is it okay if I pay you when you pay me? Or you get folks saying, oh, I didn't get that invoice, which you suspect might be bullshit, but it might be true. The power phrase is, you listen, you understand that times might be tough at the moment. and here it comes, what we do in those circumstances is, so before you make these calls, you have to be prepared. You know the types of objections that you're going to get because you've had them all before, and you prepare your answer. You seize control of the telephone conversation by saying, completely understand, it is tough out there at the moment. It is tough when people that you're relying upon to pay you don't, and therefore that's making it tough for you to pay me. What we do in those circumstances is, and then you'll have your pre-prepared response. And that might be something like, look, you're going to have to pay 25%, and we'll revisit that in 5 days and talk about the remaining 75%. The golden rule in accounts receivable, because it's a cash flow game, is to keep the cash flowing. You might have some structured payment options where you can actually offer some funding of folks who can't pay the full amount. That's the time to offer those as well. But keep control of the conversation by saying, in those circumstances, what we do is.
A lot of nuggets, gold nuggets coming out from you, Dave. Now, look, obviously that leads into the escalation process that so many business owners are reticent to get involved in, because when you escalate something, you are getting serious. Right back to that very first comment, getting serious. Tell us about the escalation process that you recommend, that you've seen work, things that don't work. Maybe you've got a story or two to say how you've achieved good escalation process with a good result.
Well, I've got kids, Jamie, so a lot of what we bring to business is what we do in our family. And I do know that...
Take the phone away.
Yeah, I do know that if you sort of go to, serious level number 10, sort of, the worst case scenario too soon, and you don't actually follow through on that robs you of all of your authority as a parent. So the trick with accounts receivables, remember, if you're in touch early, is that you build the escalation slowly. And at the first stage, it might well be you've got a promise to pay. You don't say, well, if you don't pay, we're going to send it to the debt collectors, right? That's jumping down to sort of DEFCON 5 too soon. What you need to do is let them know that, look, I'll keep an eye open for that. And if we don't receive the money, I'll call you back. So the first escalation is really just simply another call back. And people avoid those. They don't want to be called back because they've, in essence, broken their promise to you. So they'll feel embarrassed about that. So many folks will pay to avoid that next escalation. But here's the thing, you have to call back. If you say you're going to do it, you absolutely have to do it. Otherwise, that's like threatening your child. If you don't do this, you won't get dessert, and then they'll get dessert anyway. So build your escalation process out, and it might be things like calling back. It might be the next stage after that is perhaps stopping credit, so no further credit is available. The next stage after that, which might be out to maybe 90 days now, is lodging a credit default with the person. And the next stage after that might be, in fact, sending it to the debt collector. At that stage, the love is gone. You've gone from honeymoon period when you got that first big order to, love's walked out the door. You don't want to work with that client again, and they probably don't want to work with you. So that's when it goes off to debt collection. At the love's gone stage, don't kid yourself. Write the debt off, send it to collection, and move on with life. It's not worth the energy and the heartache and the challenge associated with worrying about folks who aren't going to pay. So
that one step before the debt collector, you mentioned the word debt notice, was it?
Credit default, yeah.
Just tell us about that, how that works.
So when you're working through your credit process, and let's perhaps start again with the telephone call. The folks on the phone, what they're trying to do with the debtor is triage them into the folks that can pay, in which case you're offering your payment options, the ones that can't pay, in which case you're having a conversation, you're working about options. There might be some spread payment or instalment payment, and the ones that won't pay. The ones that won't pay and the ones that can't pay and you don't resolve it are the ones that are escalating through your process. At some stage, you want to be crystallising that there is no dispute. That's important because you can't lodge a credit default with one of the credit agencies if there is a dispute. So in the telephone calls that you have, and it's important to keep notes of those, make sure that there's no dispute associated with the debt, and that will give you some leverage to later lodge a credit default. And that sits on the credit file, Jamie G, for 7+ years. And if that same business owner goes to borrow from a bank and they haven't paid you, the bank would and should be asking, why is this default not being cleared? So that to most experienced business owners is something that they're really trying to avoid, and it gives you, in the event of an undisputed debt, a good deal of leverage to get paid.
Right, and then finally, resource or outsource.
Accounts receivable, it's not the sexiest thing to do in a business. It's got none of the glamour associated with perhaps marketing or selling, but it still has people involved, and you need to make sure that the people you've got in your business doing it are the right ones. You've got the right people in the right seat. So if you're going to be doing your accounts receivable yourselves and you want it to improve, make sure you invest in the people, that they've got the right tools and resources. So we talked before about taking notes with the telephone calls. That's a very important thing. If you don't have a record of those notes, you can't prove that there is no dispute over the debt. So make sure your folks have got the right tools, that they've got a quiet time during the day that they can, head off and bang out a few calls and actually devote themselves to the debtors. That's really important. If you don't, there's an option to outsource that and still have it done well. I liken it many times to domestic maintenance. It's a little bit like mowing your own lawn or having the lawn mowing contractor come in and mow it for you. It doesn't really matter so long as the lawn is mowed, because if it doesn't get mowed, if the debtors aren't collected on a timely basis, that's when the problems start.
One of the, you mentioned before, debtor days is a good KPI. Now, one of our clients, excuse me, many years ago, incentivized the person responsible or their debtor manager, who was a part-time receptionist, and you can imagine that is typical of so many small businesses. And their debtor days had blown out into the high 60s, I think it was 68 or 69 days. And this business owner came up with the idea, and they said to their debtor collector, I will give you $100 for every debtor day that you reduce. So when it goes from 68 debtor days to 67 debtor days, you will receive a bonus of $100. And when it goes from 67 to 66, another $100, and so on. So that was a clear KPI that could be measured and rewarded for the person who was responsible for getting the cash flow working again. That was very successful. And I've shared that with quite a few clients, and a lot of clients have taken that up because it's relatively low cost compared with the money that ends up in your bank account. So Dave, have you experienced anything like that? What would you recommend? Do you think that's a good KPI to drive?
Yeah, absolutely. A very wise person once said that praise is the fuel of human achievement, and praise goes with reward. So if you're putting together a accounts receivable project, and we'd recommend maybe taking some of these tips and using them for 90 days. Good time to build habits over. Make sure that you've got a celebration planned at the end, and some little milestones along the way. It's easy to work out what reducing by 1 day is. Just divide your turnover by 365, and that's what getting your debtor day measure down by 1 day is putting in your bank account.
Right. Now, I'm just going to duck off camera because there's quite a few questions here. Keep the postcard. And I'll just read them out to you, Dave. And we've got a few minutes left. Claire asked, what was that formula for calculating debtor days? By the way, is that inside your booklet?
Yeah. Oh, gee, you've got me, Jamie. I think it is. If it's not, I'll tell you now.
Right. Well, we can answer that by email later if you want the exact formula.
So, Claire, if you've got your accounts receivable in front of you and you know what your sales are for the year, it's really just two numbers. You take the total outstanding on the debtors, so that's current, so not even due yet, together with the 30, 60, 90, so the total amount of your debtors. Divide that by your sales for the year, and then multiply that figure by 365, and that will give you a number. There's no shame in the number. The strategy or the tip I gave before is track it. So the goal is to be tracking it down. If you've got a high number, you might even be able to celebrate because you've been running the business well with a lot of cash missing because you've got the high number. If you've got a low number, if your terms of trade are 14 and the number comes back at 20, pat yourself on the back. You're doing a pretty good job. Keep it low. That's the strategy.
Dave, look, you're full of wisdom today, and I've talked to you before, and I always go away listening and then hearing something new that I hadn't heard that we can apply to business. So again, for all the registrants, we'll send this out to you. It can be downloaded at the moment, but we'll send that out as an attachment to the follow-up email that will go out later on today. You'll be able to have a look at the link or click on the link and see a replay of this. If there's anything that Dave raised there that you want to just spend time slowly going through the video, it'll be there later today. But look, some really good stuff in here. There's templates, there's ideas, there's thoughts. Dave, you've done a good job by putting that together. And I have to thank you so much for joining us today. Managing cash flow, I know there's lots of facets of it, and I think we could have a follow-up webinar on places that don't sell on credit but still have cash flow issues. So thank you for today, Dave. Some really good stuff comes out of it. If a business has no cash flow, it's not going to last long. So Dave, any final word of wisdom that you can give our business owners out there listening to you today?
Well, I mean, the audience is business owners. And when I opened, I was talking about that IT conversation I had, that he was having sleepless nights because of his cash flow. My experience is that business owners always have sleepless nights, right?
Thanks.
The trick is to not have a sleepless night worrying about how you're going to pay your staff or your big creditors yourself. Have the sleepless night about what you're going to do with the marketing budget, how you're going to grow the business. Have one of those nights that you lie awake, not tossing and turning worried, but tossing and turning because you're excited by the opportunities, and have the cash flow to support it. That would be my last suggestion, is seize the moment, improve your cash flow, and that actually fixes a lot of other things too.
Thank you, Dave. That's been wonderful. And for those who just heard what Dave said, look, if any of you are having any business challenges and you just want to have someone to chat with, I'm not sure you can pick on Dave, but you can certainly pick on me, because as one of the founders of the Brainstorm Cafe, that's what we're here for. And if you just hop on the phone or Zoom or send me an email and say, Jamie, I'm really struggling with this part of my business, can I just pinch half an hour of your time? You'll get that complimentary. That's what the Brainstorm Cafe is all about. So thanks again for joining us today, and a really big thank you to Dave. Really enjoyed your presentation and you being a guest. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Jamie.
Okay, over and out. Thank you, everyone.